Good evening and welcome to our Louise self-healing class. It's a very good day at the center today, and I'm very happy to see all of you on the call today. And I can see our very there Reverend Robert at the top left-hand corner. Good to see everyone. It's a day where we'll come to learn and how to take care of ourselves. And before we start, I'd like to invite our dear Reverend Robert for the affirmative prayer. Hello, Reverend Robert. Good evening.
James, how are you? Good evening, everybody. Yes, all right. So let's kick off the evening with an affirmative prayer.
Easy to read. The two hands of God, particularly, is good.
Do we have something going?
Yeah, just a
But
minute.
there are a number of books that we have on the bookshelf that are excellent. On the taboo, against knowing who you are. I don't know whether we have that in inventory or not. But whatever you pick up of Alan Watts' writings have got to be provocative and really well worth reading, because he's one of those people who...
All right. The sounds of silence.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's move forward in that silence and connect with that inner spirit, that inner life, that inner spirit, that inner love, that inner intelligence, that calm, that poise that allows each of us to relax into this intelligence, into this openness, and allow this teaching, allow tonight's lesson to move in us, through us, and as us, to embody the principles of truth, the principles of the science of mind, and the principles of our lesson tonight. So knowing and accepting and believing that there is certainly but one mind, one life, one power and presence. It is the power and presence of a super intelligence, a superpower, an infinite power that lives, moves, and has its being within each and every one of us. That feeling, that radiant feeling of that infinite power is right now coming forth and allowing each one to relax in that calm poise and to allow tonight's lesson to move through each one, to self-empower each one, to move onward, upward, and forward, to allow the infinite source of this lesson to move us into the greater demonstrations of a greater experience in this thing called life, demonstrating greater peace and joy and harmony and calm and poise. So we are in great thanks for tonight's lesson for our pastor, Dr. Greg Harte, as he steps up to the podium to give his lessons with great ease and great confidence and great knowing that this lesson is indeed the truth that will explore greater avenues of consciousness, rising each one in that consciousness by means of this lesson. So we give thanks as I release this word into the creative law of mind and action, as it demonstrates that perfect and right activity happening right here by means of tonight's lesson. And for this, I give thanks. And so it is.
And so it is. Thank you so much. Thank you, Reverend Robert. You're welcome once again to our Louise self-healing class, and we're always very happy to have you all on the call with us. Before I invite Dr. Greg for the lesson today, I'd like to just give one announcement, then we'll do the rest afterwards. We have a class that is coming up, and it will actually start next week, Wednesday. It's entitled The Principles of Successful Living. And it's one class that I know every student of science of mind will want to be part of, because that's the fulcrum of the teaching, how to live our lives to the maximum. So it will be starting next week, and we have a number of our seasoned reverends that will be taking this class. Reverend Greg will be taking a part of the class, and Reverend Robert and Reverend Judith. So it promises to be very interesting and exciting. And if you want to register for this class, you call the center or send an email to the center. Our emails is on the chat room, and the phone numbers are also there. I'll be looking forward to receiving your calls and your chats. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Greg for the lesson today. It's entitled Criticism Skills. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the slide is up there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to our self-healing class. This is one of the Louise Hay series that I've been doing for many, many years. I'm going to start tonight with a simple quote I came across by Elvis Presley, of all people. He said, "Don't criticize what you don't understand." And then he followed up by saying, you never walked in that man's shoes. Okay. Today's lesson deals with how we self-sabotage all the time with criticism. Another author, Carlos Zafran, said, "The words which a child's heart is poisoned, whether through malice or just through ignorance, remain branded in his memory, and sooner or later, they're going to burn into his soul." That's a pretty heavy quote. The words which a child's heart is poisoned, whether through malice or just through ignorance, remain branded in their memory, and sooner or later, they burn his soul. So this is a really important lesson, and we're all somewhat guilty of. It's that dialogue. Every Thursday night I ask that question. Most of you know, what's that dialogue? That dialogue that's going on with the most important person in the world, because my God, it does a number on us, right? So I've done this lesson in different versions through the years, and this comes from the Louise Hay material. When you're able to stop criticizing yourself, you won't feel the need to be critical of others. When you get to that point where you're at peace with yourself completely and totally, you're going to be at peace with other people too. There's several checklists in my vast amount of the Louise Hay material that I've accumulated over time on this subject. We might call this one the criticism and judgment checklist. And I'll read off a few things and just notice if anything comes up for you. And never is this designed as another way to criticize yourself, but just to notice, see if there's anything you're still carrying, or if you do any version of any of these things, just notice. Why are there so many bad drivers? Another is, why are some people so darn stupid? Or why am I so stupid? Why am I dumb? Or my gosh. Or why are these folks, whoever your mind goes and thinks about, why are they so ignorant? Or about your own personal physicality. I'm so fat, or I'm unattractive. I don't like the way I appear. Or I'd do something if I looked better, or if I were younger, or anything else. So do you have any of that stuff going on with yourselves? Or you might be noticing I've been guilty of this before. Or you might be noticing how someone's dressed, what their attire is. And you might be thinking, oh my God, that's terrible. And it's terrible. And you do some number, you're assessing how other people are looking. And you might think, oh my goodness, it's really ugly. There ought to be a law. They shouldn't do that. Just notice, because this is you and your conversations that you're having with you. And you might see somebody striving in any endeavor, right? And you might be concluding privately that, oh, this person will never succeed. They'll never finish the job. Or maybe it's a self-assessment towards yourself, and you might say, oh, I'm an idiot. I'm a klutz. I can't do that. I can't do this. I can't do that. Or you might notice, as you're assessing an environment, or you're going into a new place, you might be thinking, oh my God, these people are not organized. They're such complete slobs. Or you might have a neighbor or some neighbors in your building, and they're noisy, and you might think they're rude and they're noisy. And so you have a bunch of things going on in that area possibly. And then in your world where everything is happening, you might be carrying on a story where you think, oh, nobody ever asked me my opinion, or no one asked me what I think. No one cares what I think. Now, this isn't really aimed for New Yorkers so much. You might see yourself saying, "Oh, I can't believe that old car they're driving, that piece of junk." That's more for the Florida crowd and Midwest, I guess. Or you listen to somebody laugh. I can think of a certain politician that comes to mind. I'd be guilty of that too. And you might be thinking, "Oh, I hate their laugh or her laugh or their laugh." And or you have an assessment about people. You know, they're ignorant, they're lazy. That could be people anywhere. But just notice if anything comes up for you. You might find, and you might be saying to yourself, "I'm too short, I'm too tall, I'm too..." Whatever comes after two is going to be suspect, TOO. I hate being the way I am. If you have any of that going on or any part of your body, just take note of it. As you think of different friends and people you know, wherever you think, well, they're not too smart, they're not too swift, or worse, you're thinking it of yourself, just notice it, right? You're in a restaurant and you're saying, "The food here is terrible, the service is terrible, it's too much money, everything about it is lousy." Notice all that stuff, because this is where you show up with your belief system. You got beliefs about foreigners. I won't name all the groups, but you know yourself, or you might be looking at someone's shoes and how can they wear those ugly shoes? You might have beliefs about men, and that can be anything. On the paper it says all men are selfish, or all men are brutes, or anything else you believe about men. You might have a whole bunch of beliefs about women. You might think women are wonderful and they're nurturers, or you might think they're catty and they're whatever you think about women. Just become aware of it tonight. Does your inner dialogue, the question here, does your inner dialogue sound like any version of any of the things I listed? Because this is a night and a session for you to become aware of the stories that you're perpetuating and that you're spinning. You might not even be conscious that you're doing it. Is your inner voice picking, criticizing? Are you seeing life through critical eyes? Do you judge everything like most people? Do you stand in being self-righteous, and all that? So again, we go back to Zaffron's quote, "The words which a child's heart is poisoned, whether through malice or ignorance, remain branded in his or her memory, and sooner or later they burn into their soul." So we've got a lot of stuff within us that's been going around within us for years. Most of us have such a strong habit of judgment and criticism that it's really difficult to break it. I mean, you have half a chance if you come into a teaching like this, because we're always working with we play with word BS, our belief system. We're always attempting to catch ourselves in any of that type of storytelling, because it's all baloney, as Shirley would say. We have a lot of blind spots, and we keep it moving. And when you come into this teaching, you're here to neutralize that type of thinking and turn it all around. Those of you who have known me a long time now know oftentimes when I'm on this subject, I refer to a unity minister, Dr. Bill Cameron, who was a friend of mine. He was an older man, but when I was first getting interested in metaphysics, I really liked him a lot. He told us that he was studying to get a master's degree in psychology before he went into the ministry. And he got really, really good in psychology, thought it was fascinating, the human mind, right? And the workings of the mind. And he was particularly interested in abnormal psychology, as I recall. And for those of you who are therapists, who've been therapists like myself, and Shirley, she might be on the call, Shirley from Staten Island, you get trained to know the symptoms, how people show up. There's a whole manual that you can list just about every mental illness that has ever been diagnosed. It's a diagnostic statistical manual. And Bill Cameron said, I got so good at knowing what was wrong with people, within 5 minutes I'd spend with anybody, I could tell you everything, what classification, what they were, and the whole spiel. So this was his training, and he was going to become a doctor or a psychiatrist. And he said to me one day, like Paul on the road to Damascus, I got hit by a blinding light. He said, I just realized that my whole life orientation towards this subject was backwards. He says, I really, really, really need to start focusing on what's there, what people have, and the good and the gifts that they have, rather than what's wrong. If I keep training myself to see what's wrong, and I can classify and diagnose and analyze and tear people apart in the process, he says, my life is going to be really miserable, and it isn't the direction that I want to go with. He wanted to build people up. He wanted to build his patients up. He wanted to build his congregation up. And his whole bent became seeing the wholeness and what's good. And that really is what practitioners are supposed to be doing or trained to do, is to see the good and what's possible. We do a lot of work on self-esteem in our teaching, learning to love the self. That's really Louise Hay's greatest legacy. Her book, You Can Heal Your Life, sold 66 million copies. It circled the world in so many languages. It's done a lot to heal people. So this class is always about learning to love ourselves. My notes say we will never be able to really love ourselves until we go beyond the need to make people wrong. Okay, so wherever you're making people wrong or you're talking about people, you're really talking about yourself in some way. And some of us, we don't intend to be treacherous, we don't tend to be awful, but we got a lot of junk that lives within us, right? And all that stuff that lives within plays out in our life. See, as I'm pointing the finger out there, people, and I see everything like Dr. Bill used to, everything that's wrong with them, what that really is all the stuff within me that I'm not owning. Because as you learn to own it within yourself, you find eventually that you have very little to say about what other people are doing. What lives inside of you plays outside of you. As a baby, as a little child, Louise Hay said you were so open to life. You were a child of, you had eyes of wonder and delight. Unless somebody scared you or harmed you, you accepted life just as it was. And children, she said, are brilliant, and they're learning so much all the time from their environment. And they pick up from the tones and the atmosphere around them, even from the womb. They pick up so much. And as they're little children, they trust in the opinions of others that they love, be they grandparents, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. They pick up all the messaging in the world. Whatever the preconceived ideas of the parenting family, whatever the judgments, all become part of this little baby's programming. Children are not born with any kind of prejudice. They have no strong opinions. They are the absolute embodiment of joy and wonder. Somewhere along the line, they learn to criticize others. It is not natural. They have learned how to be critical. So today we're in a place in this class where a little self-assessment is needed. So I'll review a few questions coming from the Louise Hay self-healing material. What was your family's pattern, if you recall, regarding the subject of criticism? Do you remember being scolded as a child? Or do you remember watching one of your siblings being scolded? Or do you remember, if your parents were together, do you remember what the atmosphere was like? Was it loving? Would you describe it as supportive and happy? Were people being kind to one another, if you can recall? Some people can't remember at all because it was that bad. I've had many clients like that over the years. But if you can recall just generally what the atmosphere was like, what comes up for you regarding the word and the idea of criticism as it relates to you when you were younger? Maybe it was a mother, a grandmother, or other figures. What, if anything, were the things that you remember them criticizing? What strong opinions did your mother or maternal figure have, if you can remember? Do you know, can you think of how whoever they were, how they influenced you in either a positive or a negative way? In what ways do you remember that you were criticized as a child? And is any of that still happening? Does anything come up that says, I'm not good enough? Do you repeat it within your own life and your own consciousness? And what about the father figures of your life, be it your father or stepfather or uncles or others? Most of us had some father figures. When you think of them, what comes up? Was this person judgmental? Or if there were a couple of them, it could be a father or stepfather, were they critical? Were they smart? Did they have strong opinions? Did you feel judged? How are you like them in any ways? How did they impact you? We have a tendency to remember the best of them, of course. I know I do that with my own father and mother. But if I want to be honest with everybody, and of course that's what we're about here, is we're trying to free ourselves of stuff, right? We want to get past the past. So if I want to be honest, I would have to admit there were things that were going on within the family dynamic that were not always loving and nurturing and perfect. And there was a family pattern of criticism and sometimes worse. Does any of that stuff come up for you? When was the first time you remember being personally criticized? Was it in school? Where did you feel like you weren't enough? Did it come from your family? Perhaps they didn't accept you for this or that. Where did you first take any of that on, or did you take any of that on? You think of your family. How did your family interact with the neighbors and the people in your community? Did you have in school loving and supportive teachers, or do you remember being criticized by your teachers and told that you're not smart enough or good enough in any way? What sort of things did you get from any particular teacher that you remember? When in your life, this question comes up several times, did you first recall feeling not really as smart or as good or as attractive or not up to the standards? Where did you feel and first remember not feeling okay, if that ever happened for you? Can you see where you might have picked up any of these patterns that you still have today? Can you identify any pattern right now that is holding you back, that's still in operation? We bring all these questions up so that you can gain an awareness around things that may be still limiting you. Is there any area that comes to mind where you know that you have a tendency to be self-critical, or where you have a tendency to be critical of others? And if so, just make a note of it for this evening. All of the work we do at the Center for Spiritual Living in New York, where Louise Hay studied, is to bring these dark places to light so we can be free of them. If there's some area or something that comes up for you in this class where you're still a little bit uncomfortable, simply make a note of it for yourself. The next question is, as you recall, who was the most critical person in your childhood? Usually we can name at least one. Perhaps you were led to believe that you need to criticize yourself in order to move forward. Like you have to man up or woman up, so you've got this inner thing going on that I'm not good enough. I need to do more. I need to do more. Maybe you were programmed with some of that. Maybe you didn't know that you were brilliant and wonderful from the start, and that all you really needed was to be nurtured. Louise Hay wrote that she didn't agree with that philosophy, that you got to be better and get better because you were born into this life fully equipped, a child of God, an individualization of God life. And all you ever needed to be was nurtured. And so here's an opportunity for you tonight to release any and all of this baggage that, we carry around. Louise maintained through all of her writings that we grow best when we maintain a loving atmosphere. We must insist on it. So if you're in a world where there's a lot of criticism and critical thinking, it's time to let that go, would be her suggestion, I'm sure. And, whatever happened to you in the past happened to you in the past. The great sin would be to let it continue in the present. So we want to be aware of what we're doing, what our inner dialogue is. So I've got a quick exercise that's a part of this particular class. It's called The Three Things That You're Critical About. If you were to make a list of only 3 things that you criticize yourself over, let's do it, right? So quick, so your mind doesn't have a chance to rationalize. You might think, well, I've got endless things, but let's just pick 3. It might be a behavior. It might be something you do over and over. It might be regarding your appearance you're critical of. It could be about, the things you don't do or you don't do. You might think you're too lazy, however you judge yourself in whatever ways. I want you to note 3 things. You might think you're bright, you might think you're not bright enough, Whatever it is, it doesn't matter, it's just a thought, right? So if you can think of wherever you measure yourself not good enough, this would be the time for you to, not for us, for yourself to think about it. So as you think about that list of the things you're critical about, mentally write it down. You might recall, when did that first start happening? Whatever comes to mind, you might ask, well, how did that begin? Where did that begin? Where did you first start labeling yourself as wrong and not adequate, wrong and not good enough? And here's the thing to realize is you've been nurturing that negative idea all through your life, right? And it's been creating worlds upon worlds of experience. Isn't it amazing how long you've been picking on yourself for this central theme, which is going to be some version of I'm not adequate or I'm not good enough? Louise Hay said, this habit has not produced any positive changes in your life, right? I can promise you. Anything that I've been nurturing around has not done me any good, except, I don't know why we cling to things. But the thing is, we want to identify it. I'm a member of a 12-step program. There's several inventories involved in it. And the first is admitting you have a problem, right? And then there's several other inventories. There's no chance of changing something unless you first become aware of it. So as you think about these 3 things and these patterns and how long they've been impacting you, shedding light on it will only help you release it. Criticism doesn't work. It only makes you feel bad. And the thing I've learned as a young therapist 25 years ago, our feelings follow our thoughts. So, I can think myself into depression. I can think myself into, many places that I don't need to go anymore. No thought is idle. So we really work on being the guardian at the gate. I think that came from Florence Scovel Shinn. I'm not sure. The guardian at the gate of our own thoughts. We want to get a handle on them to the best that we can. Millions of people purchased the book, You Can Heal Your Life, right? Tens of millions, 65, 66. And now it seems like there's a whole generation of people who are very careful of the word should. Louise Hay wrote, rarely is the word should used in a positive way. Generally, what gets communicated with the word should is criticism, negativity, condemnation, criticism, all in a word. Louise thought it was the worst word in the English language. I know, I've taught this for so many years, that a person can grow a lot. They can level up metaphysically a lot simply by learning to catch themselves in the use of the word should. We teach you in all of our classes how to love yourself more, and we will lead you towards seeing, and as you do this, right, it will lead you towards seeing the good in all. And you'll learn how to see the good in all the time. If you are that person, you are leveling yourself up to be a person that Ernest Holmes described as a person who's living the affirmative life. Getting a handle on all that, on that particular word, which Louise Hay thought should be banished from the language, thrown into the garbage forever, would be a great step forward toward learning to live the affirmative life. The author, the founder, Ernest Holmes, addressed his audience, I think it was his final talk. He said, find me one person who is for something and against nothing, and I will find the Redeemer of my soul. Find me one person who's truly living the affirmative life. That's a person who's seen the good, the God, the good everywhere in all things. Find me a person like that who's redeemed, so redeemed from the bondage of self, because that person's living in and with positive expectancy. Such a person is relieved of judgments and struggle to such a large degree because they're preoccupied. Their spiritual practice is to be living, seeing the good. And here's the thing I want to say to anybody listening tonight, and now I know there's hundreds of people listening in our extended audience. You can get there. Life wasn't meant to be a struggle. It really wasn't. I learned that from Stuart Wald in all his books years ago. You know, misery's not God ordained. Misery's optional. There's no power outside of you trying to make your life miserable. We understand here that we create our own experience. Our criticism, our judgments, for the most part, are learned, and they have been endlessly reinforced. So for anyone who wants to grow and transform and be transformed, you might say to yourself, for any patterns, I'm willing to stop right now. I'm going to release this pattern. I'm going to turn it around and tell yourself practically the exact opposite of whatever the negative pattern is. I used to use a phrase for many years. I release the need for this. Whatever this is, I release the need for it. Because if it's there, it's something that there's a payoff for me somehow in doing it. And that's a good one for anybody. If you find yourself in a pattern, you can stop, you can say next, you can neutralize the thought, and you can say to yourself, I release the need for this. Louise would say, in order for a child, or adult for that matter, to grow and blossom, he or she needs love, they need acceptance, and they need praise. And it's too late for us right now to be, we're not children anymore, but we can certainly learn to give ourselves love, acceptance, and praise. We can be shown better ways to do things without making the way we do something wrong. The child inside of you still needs love and acceptance, and it needs approval. I've got a couple affirmations for you to use tonight. Many of you probably already do this. You can look at your image in the mirror and look directly in your eyes and say, I love, accept, and approve of you exactly as you are. You can say you are perfect exactly the way you are. I love you and I know that you're doing the best that you can. you can learn to have that kind of dialogue with the most important person in the world. You can say, I approve of you. Or you might say, let's see if we can find a better way to do this. Like you would be talking to a precious child or someone that you love greatly. Growing, Louise thought, and changing can be fun, and we can do it together. And you can, work with yourself in all of these dialogues. So I think I'm going to close with that for the moment. I've got a whole bunch of other things. Here, I'll give you one or two quotes more. I have Bob Dylan on the record here saying, don't criticize what you can't understand. And I have another. He who throws dirt around always loses ground. Shannon Alder wrote, often those that criticize others reveal what they themselves lack. And Mark Twain, I'll close with him. One mustn't criticize other people on the grounds where he can't stand perpendicular himself. And there's endless more. So that's it for this evening. We're going to, in the other side of the break, we're going to have an opportunity for people to share on this subject and also talk about what the inner dialogue is. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Thank you.